Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you?
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want.
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
You will never know unless you actually start exploring. And there's so many movies that have come up now, especially, from Hollywood. There's so many movies that are based on mythology. Everybody knows Thor, everybody knows, the Clash of the Titans, etc. The Percy Jackson movies. Harry Potter had so many references, from Greek and Roman mythologies. So there is an interest, in this, the treasure that we have of knowledge from various ancient mythologies. And it would be foolish to, not dig deeper and not try to find out, if there is anything of value besides entertainment, if there is any knowledge, if there's any historical knowledge, if there's any scientific data, if there's any logic that can be gleaned out of all these stories, and what are they trying to tell us?
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
All things continually lead back to serpents, dragons, fairies, Nephilim, and fallen angels.
In the distance looms a mystical mountain.
As Mike Heiser used to say, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important.
At its peak, a great fire burns, concealing the Prometheus lens.
This development of this knowledge that's being talked about within the mystery schools.
An ancient artifact said to reveal the hidden truth within a deliberately darkened world.
There's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
The Smithsonian, they caught wind of a giant skeleton. They would send their agents out to get it.
But it takes courage to move forward, to move out of the shadows, out of the unreality that we think of as reality.
We are all on the hero's journey.
Mankind has been in contact with and influenced by extraterrestrials.
Leave the Sitchin mound of bull feathers out of it.
Look at it from a different perspective.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we are about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Justin, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Hey, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And if you don't care, coming down below, we'll have our socials. Be sure to check us out on our various platforms. It'd be much appreciated. And once again, just to reach out, guys, if you are an author, a researcher, had a supernatural experience, something that would be an interesting conversation, feel free to go to the website, reach out to me, or even hit me up on my DMs on social media. I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with you. But today, guys, we're going to dive into a subject that has been really fascinating to me, and I've not really just taken a deep dive yet. I was looking on YouTube into the Hindu beliefs and the Hindu mythology and all these different things, and I come across this man that was very well researched, very well spoken, and he has the doctor title in front of his name to even back up all of his smart talk too. So I actually reached out to this person, and he was more than willing to come and sit down and talk with us today. So I'm just extremely thankful for this man and his time to sit down and talk with us. But I'd like to introduce for the first time to the show Dr. Vineet Aggarwal. I'd like to just thank you for coming on and welcome to the Prometheus Lens, Dr. Vineet.
Thank you so much, Justin, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for all the kind words of introduction that you mentioned. I must add that I'm not a PhD doctor, I'm not a doctorate, I'm a medical doctor, and this just happens to be a passion that I pursue. So, just to be clear. I'm not a doctorate in Hindu scriptures or Hindu mythology, but it's definitely something that I've pursued since more than a decade now. So that's why I do sound a little intelligent.
Well, if you don't care, just let everybody know a little bit about your past and how you got into this, and just give everybody a feel for who you are.
For sure. So, Justin, as I said, or as you said, rather, that I'm a doctor. So that's my basic education. I did my medicine, and then I did my management, actually. I did not pursue practice, or I did not join a hospital. I, in fact, decided to join the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm currently working in the pharma sector with an Indian pharmaceutical. And during my work, I actually got to travel a lot. I interact with a lot of international colleagues across Asia, sometimes Europe, Middle East, Africa. And the more I traveled, the more I realized, there is so much common and there's so many similarities amongst the beliefs that we have, especially the traditional beliefs, the traditional belief systems in each country. Whether it's the African nations, whether it's Southeast Asia, China, Japan, everything, comes it appears to come from a single source, because there's just too many similarities for it to be a coincidence. And that's how I started to explore it. And I do have a decent knowledge of the Hindu belief system. But then I decided to dig deeper and, find out all these similarities, which were popping up everywhere. And I decided to put it down in a blog. And this was back in 2011. So, blogs were the in thing at that time. You feel so old talking about blogs, but, it used to feel good to be called a blogger. And so this blog is called...
We remember the dial-up internet days, don't we? That sound.
Yeah, so this blog is called Decode Hindu Mythology. And, so the blog actually took off. I did not know whether anybody would even, chance upon it, because there was no internet marketing. There was no Facebook promotions at that time. I did not know how to promote it. But to my surprise, there were people landing on those articles that I had put down in the blog through my research. Every day about 1,000 hits, from random people across the globe. And that actually kind of showed me that, there is an interest in this topic, and there are others like me who are also trying to explore and understand these commonalities or similarities. Though primarily I have researched more into the Hindu myths, legends, and scriptures, but also tied them up, with the similarities in different world religions, the ancient religions especially. And I think that's how it all started. And then thereafter, they came the books and then podcasts, etc. So now I'm doing this on my weekends, and it's Friday night here in India, and I'm sitting here talking to you.
That's right. We're the weekend warriors of the world.
True.
But yeah, like you said, we was even talking before the show started, and how my path was very similar to yours, just looking through all these different things and all the commonalities and the common threads. And we even said before we got started that we are both, we don't believe in coincidence theory. There has to be an ancient source from where all this stuff extends, and it's a journey. You have to go out into the unknown and explore these things and bring back the treasures to share with the world.
Definitely, because there is just too much to explore. It's unfair on our part if we do not try to do that. Whether it is of our interest or not, whether it catches your fancy or not, that's a different thing. But you will never know unless you actually start exploring. And there's so many movies that have come up now, especially from Hollywood. There's so many movies that are based on mythology. Everybody knows Thor. Everybody knows, the Clash of the Titans, etc. The Percy Jackson movies. Harry Potter had so many references, from Greek and Roman mythologies. So there is an interest, in this, the treasure that we have of knowledge from various ancient mythologies. And it would be foolish to, not dig deeper and not try to find out, if there is anything off value besides entertainment, if there is any knowledge, if there's any historical knowledge, if there's any scientific data, if there's any logic that can be gleaned out of all these stories, and what are they trying to tell us? How can it help us in our everyday life today? Whether it is relevant or not, we'll only find out if we explore them.
Yeah, and you can't rely on other people too, because anybody that knows the Noah's Ark story, for instance, when they come out with that movie Noah.
Yeah,
I mean, they did go off a lot of common biblical themes, but they took a lot of liberties and put a lot of extra spin on stuff. So it's like, they tell you a partial truth. So if you enjoy the movies and stuff, you really need to read the material.
Yeah,
because there's so much more to find out and get your story straight by actually reading the material versus relying on someone else to give you the information.
Definitely. In fact, Noah's Ark has a parallel in Hindu scriptures as well. And, a lot of people are unaware that, this is not just a Abrahamic religion-related myth. It is actually a belief that is held by many, many ancient cultures, across geographies, right from Philippines to Africa to the Native American civilizations, to Sumeria to Egypt. There's just too many coincidences, there's just too many people doing the same thing as what Noah had done. And interestingly, I was just recently visiting a temple in India. It's in the northern part of India, near the Himalayan mountains, in the Himalayas actually. And the place is called Manali. It's a hill station, and I'd gone for a trek just ahead of Manali, a couple of days trek, a hike. And the place is actually named after Manu, who's the Hindu counterpart of Noah. And Manu is, in Hindu scriptures, he's the first man. And interestingly, the root of the English word man is, I think it is German or, German root, which is manus, which is very similar to Manu, which is the Sanskrit name of the first man. And, it just hit me that, it is not a coincidence. There has to be some relationship here. And Manu's ship, the Ark, the Noah's Ark, is supposed to have landed because the entire world was flooded. So where would it land? At the highest peaks. So it kind of makes sense that, it landed in the Himalayas. And, the mountains where the ship landed, that particular place was called Manu Alaya, which means the home of Manu or the abode of Manu, which has now got corrupted into Manali. So it comes from Manu Alaya, and this is Manali. It is a popular hill station. Many Indians visit it, and most of them still don't know that this is, related to the Noah's Ark story. So it's just amazing, what you can find if you just keep your eyes and ears open and mind, especially your mind open, and see the possibilities that could be there.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to teach anybody anything if they already know it all. You have to be willing to have these conversations, and wisdom is often found, in my experience, from the most unexpected places. And nobody's got it all right, so it's like everybody has a little piece of the golden puzzle. So we need to try to gather those pieces from as many people as we can and put together a whole picture.
Yes, and we hope we'll get a true picture, at least as close to the complete picture as we can, by putting all the pieces together. And that's what you're doing, so that's great. I watched a couple of your podcasts. Not complete, but I did get a sense of, what the kind of interactions you have. It was definitely useful, to know whatever is available and whatever theories are there, whatever experiences people have had, and how it can actually give us a sort of a unified or holistic vision of where humanity is headed, or where we should be headed, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of people we like to get in our little tribal boxes, and section ourselves off, and it's like a lot of times we forget, we are one race, we are the human race,
Yes. Yeah, Manu's children.
Well, yeah. Well, I wanted to go through some of these stories and have you just go into detail and inform us on some of it. But I definitely wanted to hear about the creation and the flood story.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you touched on that a little bit, but if we can like just rewind a little bit and go to the creation and get that from your perspective and all the stories surrounding creation.
Sure. So I think, the story of creation in Hinduism is a bit different from how it is told in the Abrahamic religions. And it is a little more, it starts a little more abstract and then it becomes more concrete. So the oldest scriptures that we have in Hinduism, which is the Rig Veda, the Vedas, and they are believed to be at least from 1500 BC, 1500 BC. That was when they were written down. But they existed for the longest time. They survived and they thrived through an oral tradition of passing down the scriptures. So we really don't know the antiquity of these scriptures, but it runs into thousands of years, before the Common Era. And the scriptures talk about a primal man, a cosmic Purush. So man is not literally a man or a male. It just means the primal being. So the primal being actually created this entire universe around us. That's what the Rig Veda tells us. Now, the stories are more detailed in other scriptures, other Hindu scriptures, which are called the Puranas. The Puranas have detailed stories, whereas Rig Veda has more of verses or hymns or prayers to the gods. They are the odes to the gods. But the Puranas detail the stories of the gods and the kings. So in the Puranas, you find the entire creation story very beautifully narrated. And it begins with a form of Lord Vishnu. I'll have to give you a little bit of background before I go into the story, right? So primarily, a lot of people believe that Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. We have multiple gods, just like the Greeks or the Romans did or the Egyptians did. But that's only partially true. What is actually believed in Hinduism is that all these multiple gods or multiple forms of the god, and they are actually emanating from the same supreme being. So there's one universal supreme being whom we know as God, and this God manifests himself or herself, itself. Let's be gender neutral here. But God manifests in various forms for various functions. So three of these major forms that we believe in Hinduism are of the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer. So, of course, for the universe to come into being, it has to be created by someone. For it to continue functioning smoothly, there has to be a preserver or a manager. And at the end of time, because we believe time is cyclical, it's not linear. So there's creation, there's preservation, there's destruction, and then again creation begins. So somebody has to be responsible for that destruction bit as well. So we have three major gods. It is the Hindu Trinity, just like you have in Christianity. There's a Trinity. There's a Trinity in Hinduism as well, of Brahma, who's the creator, Vishnu, who's the preserver, and Shiva, who's the destroyer. So these are the three major gods. And besides them is the Shakti, which is energy, who is considered as the feminine aspect of God. So this is, the divine feminine, who's also worshipped in Hinduism, along with the male gods. So again, these are symbolic. The male and female genders are very symbolic, but what it is trying to tell us is that, there are different aspects to this universe, and one concept cannot cover everything. You have to have multiple angles or multiple perspectives of understanding the supreme being of, the reality. So from here, the creation begins. Now, Brahma is the creator, and Brahma emerges from Vishnu. And very symbolically, a lot of people think of these stories as very fantastical, and they don't believe that it's actually true, but they are very symbolic stories. Lord Vishnu, who is giving rise to multiple universes. There's also the concept of multiverse in Hinduism. And it is said that every time Vishnu exhales, there's a universe that pops out from each of his body pore. So, we have, I don't know, a million or more than a million body pores probably. So there's millions of universes coming out of Vishnu's body every time he exhales. And when he
Yeah, and don't they say every time he?
Sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, don't they say too, like, and when he inhales, that is the destruction cycle.
Exactly.
And for every universe he creates, there's a Brahma also.
Yes. So when he inhales, the universes go back into his body, and that is the life of the universe. The life of the universe is one breath of Vishnu. So imagine the grand concept of God that is there in the Puranas. And for each universe, Vishnu again manifests in another form.
Are you a hunter, a hiker, prepper, or just someone that enjoys the great outdoors? Well, if you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. Squat Survival Gear is an American, veteran-owned company, and everything they make is 100% American sourced. And what makes it even more badass is that they have a cryptid-inspired line. Everything from Sasquatch to Mothman. Head on over to squatsurvivalgear.com and use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide. Hey, what is going on, guys? Hey, are you enjoying the show? Are you just geeking out and binge watching every minute of Prometheus Lens podcast that you've got available? And now you found yourself at the end of the line. Like, man, I've seen them all. I'm all caught up. Now I just gotta wait till every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard for the lives. Hey, let me let you in on a little secret, man. We got this thing called the All Access Pass, and there is tons of exclusive members-only content there. We have all kinds of episodes. You get these episodes 48 hours early. You get monthly Q&As and access to the private Facebook community, and so much more that is coming on down the line. And it's your way of supporting the show and help me to keep doing what I love to do and what you obviously enjoy. So head on over to the website, PrometheusLensPodcast.com, and sign up. See you guys on the other side.
Again, another Vishnu form for that particular universe. And from that Vishnu, from his navel emerges a lotus flower. Okay? That's a story, all right? So, and in that lotus flower is Brahma, who is the first mortal being in that universe. Because Brahma has a fixed lifespan of 100 years, which is the life of the universe. It's not human years. It's not human. We are not talking about solar years here. We're talking about, in truth, if you do the calculation, it comes out to about 311 trillion human years, the life of Brahma. And this is the calculation that comes from the scriptures. So Brahma emerges. And again, it's very symbolic. Vishnu implies space. The concept of Vishnu that we're talking about, because there's multiple universes coming out of him, he's space manifested as a deity, right? And Brahma is the material creation. And from Brahma, so Brahma coming out from a lotus, which is joined to Vishnu's navel, it's again symbolic of the umbilical cord that connects a child with its mother, right? So this is the symbolism that you find in Puranas. A lot of people just criticize the scriptures without understanding the meaning. But this is what they're trying to show, that Vishnu is the parent of Brahma. Space is the parent of this material world. And along with, since we have discussed Vishnu and Brahma, the third entity on the Trinity is Shiva. And Shiva, he's also called Mahakal. Kal means time, and Maha, just as you have in Mahatma Gandhi. So Maha means great. Okay. So Shiva is Mahakal, or great time. So you have the space aspect covered with Vishnu, you have the time aspect covered with Shiva, and within the space-time continuum exists the material creation, and that is represented by Brahma. So that is the origin of this entire multiverse, not just our universe, not just our planet or our solar system, but the entire multiverse that is believed in Hinduism to exist. So I can go on and on. So please pitch if you have any
Oh,
questions or
no.
there's any doubts.
And that's as I was looking into this, because I do read a lot of other material, and I know it's steeped with esoteric meaning and symbolism and allegory. So when I was reading into that, I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's another Trinity, and it's time, space, matter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you
and
see that
exactly.
in
Energy,
Yeah.
the divine feminine, which is just, it's swirling around in this universe, and matter and energy, they keep transforming. So it's a very important role that energy also plays. So Brahma now, he's given the task of creating the world. So the steps that are again detailed in our Puranas are also very symbolic, in the sense that first is the existence of non-tangible creation. The first couple of steps of the creation, there's about 7 or 8 steps that are detailed, but at least the first 3 happen even before Brahma is born. Even before Brahma
Now,
comes
is
out.
this the egg?
Yeah, sometimes it's called an egg, but it's generally a lotus. It's the golden lotus, right, from which Brahma is
Okay.
born. And
I seen some video they were talking about. It was I'm trying to think. It was Vishnu laying on a large serpent with 1,000 heads,
Yeah.
and that an egg appears,
right, so that
and that it's
so in
Brahma.
some Puranas it's called the egg, so sometimes it's called the golden lotus, but from it comes Brahma, right? But so Vishnu, again, since you mentioned the serpent on which Vishnu lies, is also representing time, because that serpent is called Ananta, which means endless. That serpent is also called Shesha, which means remainder. So what is left when the entire creation is destroyed? It's still, time is still there. Even if I do not exist today, or this world does not exist today, time does not end, time does not stop. It stops for me, relatively, subjectively, but not, in a universal manner. So again, there's a bit of symbolism there. So Brahma is given the task of creation. So before Brahma is born, there's all these intangible substances, which probably, the ions and the molecules and the elements, floating around in the universe, the plasma that existed. And after this, when Brahma starts creating, when Brahma takes over, that's when forms come into being. And Brahma first starts with the immovable objects. So it's not right, there on the first day itself that he starts creating living beings. First, the living beings need a place to stay. He knows the task is to create living beings, but before that, he has to do a lot of work, a lot of preparation. So there's the immovable objects like the, planets, the land masses. Of course, planets move, but they don't move out of their own volition, right? It's because of the effect of gravity. So for all practical purposes, they are immovable objects, but they are moving because of the force of a higher gravitational field or a stronger gravitational field. So Brahma creates all these places for living beings to stay in before creating them. And before creating beings that can talk, walk, eat, mate, he first creates the vegetation. So, that is the sustenance on which, these later life forms will thrive. So there's the vegetation that comes up, there's trees, there's plants, and thereafter there is the mention of some divine entities being created. Even before humans came, Brahma creates the rest of the entire pantheon, which is there in Hinduism. So all the gods, the goddesses, the demons, The other divine beings, the semi-divine beings, all of them come from Brahma through different processes. And then come the humans. And humans, when they are created, Brahma assigns them this planet Earth. And he gives Manu, whom we talked about earlier, the first man, and he gives Manu and his counterpart, who's called Shatrupa. Again, it's symbolic. Shatrupa means somebody who has 100 forms. So, initially when life was developing, there was no fixed features. There was no fixed, all of us, even though all of us are humans, all of us have very different features, right? Very different genetic makeup, very different morphological makeup, the racial differences that we have. So Shatrupa probably represents, she's the mother of all these different life or human forms that are going to come. Right, so Manu and Shatrupa.
And one thing I found fascinating was the name, like how close it is, because in different translations, I even wrote it down if I can find it. It was Sarah.
Yeah, so there's also a name called Shraddha, which is, it is similar to Sarah, but...
and I thought of Sarah from the Bible, because Sarah and Abraham, and she, couldn't have a child, and God blessed her with a child. So I thought of that correlation when I was looking into this. But before we go further, I thought the creation or the manifestation of Shiva, I thought that story was very fascinating. Could you touch on that before we go any further?
So just as Vishnu has multiple forms, Shiva also has multiple forms. And, one form, the form of time, exists before immaterial, it's immaterial whether the universe has come into being or not. Shiva is always there, just as Vishnu is always there. But Brahma emerges with the birth of the universe. And so do a couple of forms of Shiva and Vishnu as well, to assist him in the process. So this form of Shiva, which exists in this universe, who's the time deity of time, so to say, in our universe, he emerges from Brahma's forehead when Brahma is completely flabbergasted. Brahma is trying to create, in the initial steps, he's trying to create life, but he's unable to do it. And the life forms that he does create, they refuse to help him in, further spreading, or further taking over the responsibility of creating new life forms. So Brahma is, a little sad. He's a little dejected. He's in a very negative, dark zone. And that's when, from his forehead, which is the region of the third eye, which we believe, which is actually corresponding to your pineal gland. And, from this region comes out a dark-colored baby. And this baby is crying. So, which is called Rudan in Sanskrit. Crying is called Rudan. So, Brahma tells him, don't cry. And that's why the baby is named Rudra, the one who was crying. And this is Shiva, okay? And Shiva is asked again by Brahma to help him in this purpose of creation or spreading light, propagating light. And because it's a tedious job, right? Think of Brahma, he's just sitting and individually creating each being. It's a never-ending task and it's a thankless task. So he wants somebody to help, somebody to suggest some way for it to become self-propagating. And that's where Shiva comes in. So Shiva first divides himself into 10 more of his kind, which is very suggestive of binary fission. The process through which the early life forms on this planet actually reproduced. There was no sexual reproduction. So the early life forms through mitosis, there was binary fission, and they propagated. And that's exactly what Shiva does. There's now, instead of one, there's 11 Rudras. So Brahma is happy. And then he asks him to go up one step further. So from each of the Rudras, from the left-hand side, separates another entity. And for the first time in this universe, we have a separation of gender. And we have the Rudras and the Rudranis, who are the female forms of the Rudras. So now we have a male form and a female form. And thereafter, the process of, sexual reproduction would come into play. Because still now, there was no difference of sexes. Now there is two different genders, and that is how now copulation, the sexual or the coitus, would become meaningful, where a child can be conceived just by the help of the mother and the father, and Brahma has no role to play in it. And that is how, the next steps of creation happen. Of course, not by Shiva and not by Rudra himself immediately, but just the manifestation of the feminine principle gives idea to Brahma to create the female counterparts of all the male beings that he had created earlier. And one of them is, he's called the thought-born or mind-born son of Brahma, because Brahma did not have any raw material to create it. He was just thinking of, beings, and they were actually manifesting. So this being is called Daksh, and his wife is called Prasuti. Now, interestingly, again, Prasuti means labor. Labor as in not in physical work, but labor as in a delivery room. So in Sanskrit or in Hindi, we use the word Prasuti Kaksh for the labor room, where the mother is about to deliver. That tells us that this is where, the creation became self-propagating after Daksh and Prasuti. And Daksh is called a Prajapati, or he's the lord of the beings, because it is his descendants who further populated this entire universe. So Hindu scriptures do not talk just about the earth. There are multiple lokas that some believe are different dimensions or different, realms. But there's different lokas within this universe that are mentioned in the scriptures. And it is Daksha's progeny that have populated this entire universe, or all these lokas at least.
Which I know every culture, they have various, stories and stuff. And I love hearing the ones that you're coming up with, because they're ones that I've not heard. And that's why I'm just kind of sitting here like, okay. Because the one I had heard about, it was basically the egg split, and Brahma, and that was the heaven and the earth, and he made the material objects of the universe and earth, and created the gods. And it was just a time of the gods, where the gods were just, walking around earth and enjoying earth or whatever. And that Brahma and Vishnu crossed paths, and Vishnu was bragging how he was the supreme, and all the creation, worships him and all this stuff. And Brahma's like, well, they forget that I was the one that created it. They praise me instead of you. Yeah. And they kind of get into this headbutt match. And then Vishnu says, well, if there's a God greater than me, then let him manifest. And then this huge pillar of fire shoots up from the earth in between them, and it has no end in sight going into the ground or up into the space. So, Brahma turns himself into a goose and tries to fly up to see what's at the end. And at the same time, Vishnu turns himself into a boar and uses his tusks to dig and go down to try to find the bottom. And neither one can find the end, and they meet back at where they were before, and both of them are saying there is no end in sight. And then this is when Shiva steps from the flame.
Yes. So interestingly, Justin, let me give you another perspective to this. Just as I started, initially I said, there's a recognition in Hinduism that there's no one way to describe God. So there's multiple perspectives. And the Puranas that I was talking about, the Hindu scriptures that give us all these stories, each of the Puranas, it tells us about a different day of Brahma. So Brahma's lifespan, as I said, there's 311 trillion human years. But if we break it down into Brahma years, it is just 100 Brahma years. Each of his year has, again, 12 months, 360 days, 12 months, so 30 days in each month. Now, each of this day of Brahma is called a kalpa. And each Puran that we have, the scriptures, they narrate the stories of the events that happened in one day of Brahma. So the story that I am telling you, it comes from a Puran called Bhagavad Puran, which is from a different day. It is called the Saraswat Kalp. So that is a different day of Brahma. And the story about Shiva emerging from the pillar of fire, that comes from a Shwet Kalpa, from a different Puran, Shiv Puran, which was written in the Shwet Kalpa, which is another day of Brahma. So what the Puranas tell us is that there is different ways divinity manifests in different time periods. So even
Like the whole multiverse thing.
yes, and even in this lifespan of Brahma, there is still events that are happening in different ways. So that is why sometimes you have Vishnu emerging first, and from him comes Brahma. And sometimes you have Shiva emerging as a pillar of fire. Sometimes it is the goddess who emerges first. And she's looked upon as the mother of the creation, because she manifests the entire, she manifests the Trinity itself, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So there is no real competition, between them, between the different forms. It's just each of them takes up the responsibility on a different day of Brahma of creating things or manifesting things in a different way. So that is the beauty of the Purans that fascinates me, that there's so many stories. You can never say that you know it all. There's just too much to read, and there's so many new fascinating aspects that come up every time you read. And even in the same Shiv Puran, which has the mention of the pillar of fire story, it mentions that Shiva to be the original form of Shiva. So as I said, Shiva has multiple forms, but it also contains this story of Shiva as Rudra emerging from Brahma's forehead. So it does mention that there are different forms of Shiva, and one form of Shiva emerges from Brahma's forehead. So it all ties up, in the grand scheme of things, in the multiverse of madness that we have in Hinduism. It's just beautiful the way it all ties up. And it's almost like, the Game of Thrones series, for a lack of a better reference, where, you see a character in the first season and the same character turns up in the fourth season and you realize, I've seen this one before, and, this guy is connected here. So that's how deep the stories go. It's, if somebody had
the same theme, though, the details might change a little bit, but the overall arching theme is the same.
Yeah.
But one thing I thought was intriguing to me, and I wanted to ask you specifically about that story, because as we talked before, I know it's steeped with esoteric stuff and symbolism, but in that particular story, it goes into great detail to describe Shiva, and Shiva is known as the destroyer, and even the what was it called, the Lord of Demons.
Bhutnath, yes.
But when it steps out, it talks about that third eye, and that it was gleaming on fire, and had a mace in one hand of victory or judgment. I can't remember, but then it had a trident in the other hand, and a snake coiled around its neck. Like, in your opinion and studies, like, what does those symbols mean?
So I'll explain a couple of more aspects, more than this as well, not just about Shiva, but also about Brahma and Vishnu, just to make it a little more holistic. So since we started with Vishnu earlier, and I mentioned that, Vishnu is space. He's the deity of space. Why do I say that? One, there's too many stories related to Vishnu where he's manifesting the universe. He's manifesting the creation. He's creating the creator. The color of Hindu gods is always very different, right? It's Vishnu is blue, just like the Avatar movies. In fact, the word avatar comes from the Sanskrit scriptures. Avatar is the name of Vishnu's incarnations that Vishnu takes, to preserve the universe or the earth, and, to bring back the balance of good and evil in this world. Vishnu comes down. So, avataran, from which the word avatar comes, it means descent. So, Vishnu, the supreme being, is descending into our world, our loka, our dimension, as an avatar, which is the concept, which the movie also has. And they are also shown them blue. So, Vishnu is blue. Why? Vishnu is dark. He's either portrayed dark or blue. Why? Because he represents space. So it's either the darkness of space in which you can depict him, or the blue sky in which you depict him. So, that's the symbolism that Vishnu has. As, we discussed earlier, he lies down on the serpent of time, the endless serpent of time.
The abyss.
Right? The infinite, the Ananta, or the Shesh, the remainder. Now, Shiva is associated with time, as I said, Mahakal is the great time. So you always see symbolism of three with Shiva. So the trident has three spokes, right? So it's past, present, and future. So it's the three aspects of time. Shiva has a mark on his forehead, which is like this. It is 3 lines, which again depict, it can be interpreted in multiple ways. It's the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever. But primarily, it tells us about the 3 forms of time. It's the past, the present, and the future. He also has the serpent of time coiled around his neck. Vishnu lies down on the serpent of time, and Shiva has the time serpent coiled around his neck. Shiva has the newborn moon on his forehead. It's decorating its forehead, Shiva's forehead. Why? Because in Hinduism, the calendar was a lunar calendar. So the phases of moon actually represent different dates. So you see the symbolism of moon comes in there. And there's so many beautiful ways in which, this is conveyed. A lot of people think that, this is how it is, this is how Shiva looks. But these are symbolic, right? And then he again holds a small drum in his hand. So in one hand is a trident, and in the other hand, he holds a drum. And this drum is the cosmic vibration. This is the
music of the spheres.
Yes, and this is the sound aspect. Even in Bible, as they say, in the beginning was the word. What is that word? That's the sound.
Vibration.
It's the vibration, and that is the vibration that Shiva controls. And this frequency, this vibration, that can be, utilized to also destroy at the end of time. Shiva is the consummate dancer. He's, it's very surprising, the contradictions that you see in his personality. He's the destroyer, he's the angry god, but he's also the consummate dancer. He's the best dancer, he's the lord of dance, he's the king of dance. So he's called Nata Raja. So Raja means king, as in Maharaja and Raja, right? So Raja is king and Nat is the dancer. So he's the king of dancers. And the cosmic dance that Shiva performs is the dance of destruction of this universe. So this dance of destruction, again, does not only happen at the end of this universe's lifetime, but if you see every minute, every moment, there's something which is being destroyed and something which is being created new out of it. Out of the raw material that was destroyed, something new comes out. We see it in the cycle of life. We see it in the, in plants, in animals, in objects, in physical objects. There's entropy. Everything breaks down into pieces sooner or later, right? So that is the concept of time. With time, destruction will happen. That is why Shiva is the destroyer. So he's not a negative guy who's out there, against everyone. But he is the concept of time. But sooner or later, everything will unravel, and entropy will make you break down into pieces. So that's what he represents. Interestingly, Brahma has 4 heads. Right. So if you see his,
that was an interesting story too.
And Brahma has 4 heads. And what does it represent? So I'm going to the symbolism here. There's many stories, to explain it. But the four heads actually represent the four dimensions of this universe. Because interestingly, there are stories about multiple other Brahmas. There's a very beautiful story about Krishna, who's again one of the very popular gods in Hinduism. And Brahma goes to visit Krishna in his palace when he's on earth. And Brahma asks the watchman, the doorman, the doorkeeper, that, to announce him that, Brahma has come, the Lord, the Creator has come. And Krishna smiles, and Krishna is always shown as a very mischievous, naughty, he's all being, and he's always involved in something more symbolic than you would realize. And Krishna tells the watchman to go and ask him, which Brahma is it? And Brahma is flabbergasted. He's like, what does it mean? What does that question even imply? I am the creator. And
the one and only.
Yeah. And that's when, Krishna invites Brahma inside. And he sees there are 100 different Brahmas waiting to meet Krishna. And there are others who are surrounding Krishna. And all of them have multiple heads. Some have 10 heads. Some have 100 heads. And our Brahma is the one who has 4 heads. And the only way I can make sense of it, of these multiple heads of Brahmas, or different numbers of heads, is that if it represents the physical dimensions of this world, the 4 dimensions that we live in. And there's an interesting story where Brahma actually was born with 5 heads. But Shiva cuts off one of those. And Brahma is left with 4. So what is it trying to tell us? Maybe our universe was 5-dimensional to begin with. And Shiva...
We fail.
Shiva, who's time. With time, it settled into a more, probably a better equilibrium. It found a better equilibrium in the 4-dimensional space. So much, symbolism exists in these stories that if you do not read them with open minds, they'll just appear as some fantastical stories written down by ancient storytellers. But they're clearly not just stories. They are meant to convey a lot more meaning to us.
Oh, yeah. And like when you mentioned that, from like just a biblical perspective, was the fall of Adam and Eve. It says that, we were once in the garden of God, and God walked with us, and then we broke the rules. So we were kicked out of Eden and out of the presence of God. So we, fail. So it's like, you can easily put together in your mind that we were designed to live forever, to be all-knowing and be in the presence of God. And then when that happened, sin entered the world, so therefore like we were maybe even changed on a molecular level. We are no longer self-regenerating, and we fell, and we went from the possible 5th dimension down to the 4 where we are now.
Quite possible.
Yeah.
And in fact, in our scriptures, Justin, there's a clear mention that, the human form is not to be taken lightly, and there's a concept of transmigration of souls, because we believe in reincarnation and we believe in karma. So karma is your actions. So whatever you are doing today, good or bad, will have a reaction, which is the law of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the same applies to our lives as well. Some of those reactions or repercussions we see in our lifetime. Some we do not, but they do carry on with our soul, and they manifest in our next life, in our next birth. So we have this concept of transmigration across 84 lakh, which is 840,000 births, after which you get the human form. So in our scriptures, they tell us that once you have received this human form, you should not let it go waste. You are the only species. And interestingly, there are about 870,000. I'm sorry, this is not 800. 40,000. I think it's close to 8.4 million. The calculation, because in Indian calculation, we use different terms. So it's close to 8.4 million lives that you pass through, progressing, evolving before you become a human. Science has, I think, identified about 8.7 million species on this planet. So these 8.4 million life forms that the scriptures are talking about are probably different species that populate this planet. And it is just a reminder that there is so many life forms that do not have the conscience, they do not have the consciousness to understand the gravity of the human form that you have, the opportunity that the human form provides. And I'm not a religious person. I'm not a preacher. I'm not talking from a religious perspective. I'm talking from a spiritual perspective. What else is there in our life besides our physical aspects, the mental, intellectual aspects, the emotional, the social aspects of your life? There is some higher power, there's some higher being that, we all feel at some point of time, right? Whether you can call it God, whether it's the universe manifesting itself, spirit, whatever. But this entity, the goal of human life is to understand that there's something beyond this physical life. There's something beyond eating, meeting, mating, sleeping, and reproducing. There's something beyond this. And that only the human form allows you to understand. The existential questions of life, that humanity has. Where have we come from? Why are the scientists looking for life across the universe? We're looking for aliens. We are hoping there are others. All these existential questions can be asked only by humans. So we definitely are special.
Oh, definitely, 100%. I know I don't want to take up all your time. We're getting close up to an hour, but I definitely want to pick your brain on what we touched on at the beginning of the show, where we talked about the Great Flood. Because I thought your traditions of that account were really fascinating and just really cool story, and how you had mentioned the similarities and stuff, but could you go through that and break that down for us?
Sure. So I'm not very good with remembering names, so I may not be able to tell you, the exact counterparts in each mythology. But just as I'm sure a lot of people would be aware of the Noah's Ark story, the biblical story, which also finds mention in a lot of other Abrahamic traditions. So in Hinduism, we have the concept, as I said, Manu was born, right? So now the interesting aspect comes here, which is that there is no single Manu. There are multiple Manus that are created at different time periods. Just as I said, there's different times of Brahma, different days of Brahma. Each of these days is further broken down, into hours and minutes, counterparts to hours and minutes. They're not the exact same. But all these time periods have multiple Manus. So every day of Brahma has 14 Manus. And the story of Noah actually, matches with the story of our seventh Manu, which is the present Manu. We believe that this is the present age of seventh Manu that we are living in, of this day of Brahma. And this Manu, this is an interesting story, where, so this Manu, he was a king, right? So again, it's cyclical. It's talking about, life already being present when a calamity happens. And this Manu is a king, and he's praying in the river, near the river. So we generally, morning and evening, we are supposed to offer water, to the ancestors. We fill it in our palms and we just offer it, towards east, towards the sun. So he's doing that, right, early morning. And he finds a tiny fish in his palms. And the fish is a talking fish, apparently. And the fish, requests Manu not to throw it back into the water because it's afraid of all the bigger fishes out there. The fish asks Manu to give it shelter. Manu takes it home, puts it into a small vessel. The fish grows in size, in a couple of hours. Manu has to shift it to a bigger vessel. Again, it grows up in size. The fish keeps growing throughout the day, and Manu has to continuously move that fish from one vessel to the other, to a pond, to a lake, to a river again, and ultimately to the ocean. And the fish is, it's magnificent, it's golden, it's beautiful to look at, but it is giant, it is massive. And Manu is again stunned at what has happened, and he realizes this is God, trying to give him a message. And the fish tells Manu that 7 days from that day, there would be a deluge, a great deluge would come. There would be incessant rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and the entire world would be flooded. And the advice that the fish gives to Manu is to collect the raw material for restarting life after the flood settles down. So which includes, of course, all the species, the plants, animals, the same story as we have as for Noah's Ark. Interestingly, there's another aspect, another layer to it, where the fish also asks Manu to take the 7 sages. The sages who are the rishis, who are the learned men of that time. So every time period of Manu, we have 7 different sages, who are like his advisors. So the fish advises to also take the 7 sages with him on the ship. Why is this important? Because the 7 sages will ensure the continuity of information. They are the most learned people with all the data stored in their mind. It's like having a supercomputer with you, When you are landing into a Manali or a Himalayas, you land there, there's nothing existing there. You do not know how to restart life. And these are the sages, the learned men who will share that knowledge with you, So that's, of course, there's some differences there. Now, interestingly, what I have, discovered is that all the world mythologies, from Africa to the Latin Americas, to the as far down as Polynesia, in Philippines, in Sumeria, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, of course.
North America too, the Indians.
Yes. So the Native American civilizations, all of them had the belief of a flood, of a flood that encompassed the entire landmass, which drowned everything. And there was only one man or a couple, sometimes a brother and sister, or sometimes a giant. In the Norse myth, it is a giant and his wife who survive. There's, in the Egyptian myths, I think it's the Horus, who's the god who's, traveling in a ship looking for a safe space. And he realizes that, if I remember correctly, there are 6 creations that have drowned. And he finally lands in the 7th one, which probably is Egypt, where, there was still land mass. And, so there are these tales from across the globe. How do you explain it? That, how could these civilizations, the Mayas or the, Hindus, separated by an ocean and by multiple land masses and 2 oceans, how did they develop the same story or the same legend or the same belief? So clearly there was some global catastrophe that did happen, which resulted in all this flooding and the myths and the stories being created. And I personally feel that it points out to a time which did exist in our Earth's history, which is the Ice Ages. We have had cyclical periods. Again, in Hinduism, this deluge, it's called pralay. And pralay is not one-time phenomenon. It happens at cyclical intervals. And the ice ages also happen at cyclical intervals. So the last ice age, when the meltdown happened, and see what happens when the temperatures go down, the water is drawn up from the oceans and it is converted into ice. But when the ice is melting, all that water goes back into the oceans and the coastline would change dramatically. The sea levels would rise drastically. So imagine all these civilizations, most civilizations have developed across the coast, along the coasts, along riverbanks, along water bodies, because that is very essential, right? So even today, you see the most populous or most prosperous or the biggest, cities of this world, they're very close to the coast, or they're very, of course, there may be trade centers, etc. But traditionally, all civilizations came up along water bodies. So all these civilizations, whether it is in the Philippines, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in South America, all of them living along the ocean suddenly find that, their homes are gone. So I feel that, that's one way to explain why all these diverse geographies or civilizations that emerged in diverse geographies, diverse time periods, they're thousands of years apart, and still they have the same concept, same story, which was possibly passed down from their, older generations. So somebody did remember that a catastrophe like this had happened, and we have survived that, and they have passed down those stories. So that is how we get all this. That's my take on it. So I'm not sure, how many people would agree with it, but we know ice ages happen. We know meltdown happens. It is inevitable after an ice age. So, just putting two and two together, it kind of makes sense.
Dr. Walt Brown, you familiar with him? He wrote a book called In the Beginning, and he worked for NASA, and he had a theory about some kind of catastrophic event, happened, whether it was an earthquake, asteroid, or whatever. But he said a lot of people miss in the Noah's Ark story that they just focus on the rain. He said, but when you read into the Hebrew scriptures, it says that not only did the rains come from the sky, it also the abyss burst forth from underneath the waters of the abyss. He said, so it's you can find that oceanic ridge fault line that wraps around the globe like the seam of a baseball. And he said when that asteroid hit or earthquake happened, he said it just pushed all these continents further apart. He said, and all that water rushing up threw up earth and soot. And he said that explains the pelts on the near side of the moon. He said, and then all the plate tectonics happening made volcanoes erupt, and ash soot went into the air, darkened the sun, lowered the temperatures on Earth. He said, and then slowly brought on the first ice age.
Yes.
And then maybe 12,000 years ago, we had that same belt of comets come through, and that's where you get the young Adrias event. It hit all these ice caps and rapid melt and got another flood.
Yes. We don't know what exactly causes it, what exactly leads to it. There's a lot of theories. Of course, there's asteroids, comets. There's also the concept of the precession of equinoxes. The tilt of the axis, Earth's axis might change, which does happen. It's also a cyclical phenomenon. So we really don't know what would actually trigger, but definitely it all ties up. There are situations that arise again and again. And that is when, a civilization who's actually surviving at that time or thriving at that time would find it difficult to survive, in these circumstances. And those stories would be imprinted upon their minds and their scriptures, and that is how they are passed down, and that is why all of us have these stories coming down to us.
Yeah, and when you get that story too, I thought it was fascinating how it said that it was Vishnu, right, that appeared as this fish. It was a manifestation
because he's a preserver, and he takes the avatar. He takes the avatar of the fish to warn humanity that this is what's coming. So save yourselves.
Yeah, and then the horn grew up out of his head, and that he used, I can't remember the name of the snake, but it said he had a snake that he used to wrap around the horn, and then wrapped its body around the boat.
Yes, it ties it to
and tugged it.
Yeah, that snake.
And then where you told me that it was time. It was symbolic for time too.
Exactly. And it's actually the snake that Shiva has around his neck. So it's the serpent of time, So clearly, and there's more symbolism there. Actually, Justin, if you read the Puranas, they're fascinating scriptures. Okay, if you don't get bogged down by too many details, and if you like a good story, you just deep dive into it. So in the Puranas, our Milky Way, the universe, or it's actually the universe that we see at the night is the Milky Way. We call it Milky Way, right? It's a galaxy. So galaxy, it appears curved, right? In the sky. There's a slight curve. And in our Puranas, it is equated with the shape of a jumping dolphin. Okay? Now that fish could actually represent the jumping dolphin, the universe, the Milky Way, right? And the Saptarishi, the seven sages, it's actually the constellation of Big Dipper, the Great Bear constellation. In Sanskrit and Hindi, in most Indian languages, we still call it Saptarishi, which means seven sages. And that is the constellation that you see very clearly in the Northern Hemisphere, which points you towards the North Star, the Pole Star, which again has a lot of significance in Hinduism. So there you have a story where you see the Milky Way probably tilting, maybe the Earth's axis tilted, right? And you see some connection between that, the curve that you see and the Big Dipper constellation. There's probably a comet, which is coming in that direction. It's linking them because comets have these long tails, the tails of ice, etc., which is trailing behind it. It's probably a tail that is equated with that snake, tying up.
Written in the stars.
Yeah. And I don't know, what observation they noticed or they may have noticed. But again, it's again my crazy idea, that it could probably.
I don't think you're crazy.
You're just kind, So, but I think it is quite possible that they are trying to tell us something even more deeper, than the concept of space and time. It's actually telling us about a tilt in Earth's axis or tilt in the Earth's orbit. There's something called the Milankovitch cycles. I don't know whether I pronounced it correctly. I think it's called the Milankovitch cycles. And so there's these three recurring things that happen with our Earth. One, our orbit, from an ellipse, it changes into a circle, again goes back into an ellipse. And this happens across 400,000 years or so. Okay? Then you have the tilt of axis. Earth's axis tilts between, I think, about 21 degrees and the higher tilt is about 24 degrees or something. So
it's like 25, 26 degrees.
Right?
Yeah.
So between that range, this change happens around 42,000 years. And the precession of equinoxes happens around 26,000 years. So imagine a time if all of this is happening, how crazy it would be. And even if one of this is happening, the universe, the skyline would shift, for someone who's observing it. And probably that is what they've tried to narrate in that story. So God knows, we can only, we can only discuss, we can only figure out, we can try to figure out. But I hope, these are pointers for humanity to look deeper into what has been passed down to us. All this knowledge, the knowledge that the seven sages preserved for us, for humanity. Many civilizations have that kind of belief that, they were the ancient men or ancient people, who had
the Anunnaki.
The Anunnaki, right? Yeah. So they passed down this knowledge. So we believe these were the seven sages who are, still existing, and they passed down this knowledge to us. And we believe they live in the Big Dipper constellation. So that is why it's called the Saptarishi, So it could be aliens coming down to save us. It could be, there's so many possibilities. There's just too much.
Oh, yeah. And when you read that book. It's called Hamlet's Meal. That's one of my favorite books, and it's talking about all the mythologies of the world, and not only how they are all similar, how these three authors got together and wrote this. It was they called it an essay, but this thing was like that big, and but they went through and said that all of the major myths throughout the world point back to astronomical events and constellations and in the stars. So it's right in line with what you're talking about. So that's why I was like, now you don't sound crazy to me. I've read this stuff.
Good to know.
Well, Dr. Vineet, thank you so much for your time. I'm so appreciative, and whenever you got some free time to come back again, I would love some more conversations. I want to try to soak up as much from you as I can.
My pleasure, Justin. Thank you again for having me here on your show. And I hope my accent was not too difficult to understand. And I hope your audience, would also find it useful, to know these stories. And of course, one message that I would want to leave, with you and your audience is that, do explore the Eastern myths, or the legends or the scriptures, because there's a very superficial level of knowledge that you'll get from online sources. It's very superficial. It's very basic. It has been written down by people who do not understand the religion, who do not understand the significance of a lot of things, just as I shared. But if you're really interested, I do not see it as, the stories of Hindus or the stories of Indians. I see it as the stories of mankind. These are stories that were passed down to us by our ancestors when probably all of us were one society, right? And, it's our responsibility to find out more. It should be our endeavor to find out more and to know, what they wanted to share with us, what the wisdom they wanted to pass down to us, and how it can be useful to us. There's numerous ways we can, utilize it to make our lives better. Not just, a lot of people know about yoga, but, it's not just about that. It's about, connecting with your environment, connecting with your universe in a more holistic manner, in a more conducive manner, just helpful for you, for your growth, as well as a sustained, environment, sustainable future for the entire world, for the universe. So that's my message. And thank you again for having me here, Justin. Wish you all the best for all your podcasts. And do let me know how this one performs.
Oh, definitely. And before I let you go, let everybody know where they can find, your websites, your books. Where can they connect with you and find your stuff?
I have my website, but I think if you could just search my name, Dr. Vineet Aggarwal, I have a very different way to spell my name, which probably you would have to write down in your description. But if they search my name, they can probably find, books and blogs. The blog is especially, for people people who are interested in reading more. I think the blog could be a good place to start, rather than jumping into a big Puran or a big scripture. So, because that's kind of a summary of all these. And I think you found me through, you didn't find me through the blog, but you did go through the blog, or did you find it useful?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I say I was finding your stuff and these little videos and kind of getting my toes in. So, but yeah, I definitely want to get a reading list and some recommendations from you for my future deep dives for sure.
Definitely. Thank you. Thanks again, Justin.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Go check out his work. He's all over YouTube and his blog. As you can see, he's a very, very intelligent guy and well-spoken, well-researched. And so until next time, guys, torch is high.